The rain was a cold, relentless whisper against the cracked windshield. It was the third storm this week, and the third job Ilara was working tonight. Each drop that slid down the glass felt like a tiny, mocking tear for the life she used to have. A life with warmth. A life with a bed. A life that did not smell of stale coffee and desperation. Her world had shrunk to the worn-out driver's seat of her 20-year-old sedan. The back seat was a jumble of her worldly possessions. A single bag of clothes, a threadbare blanket, and a box of photos she couldn't bring herself to look at. Everything else was gone. Sold. Lost. Stolen by a man who had promised her forever and left her with nothing. Her stomach growled, a hollow ache that had become a constant companion. She ignored it. Hunger was a luxury she couldn't afford to indulge. There was one last delivery, one last pizza in a thermal bag that was warmer than she had been in days. The address led her to a part of the city she had only ever seen in magazines. Gates slid open into a long, winding driveway, flanked by trees that stood like ancient sentinels. At the end of it, a house. It wasn't a house. It was a monument of glass and steel and light, glowing against the stormy sky like a captured star. It felt like a different planet. Ilara parked her sputtering car, the engine giving a final shuddering cough as she turned the key. She grabbed the pizza. The warmth of the box seeped through her thin jacket, a fleeting comfort against the biting wind. Each step up the wide stone walkway was a monumental effort. Her legs felt like lead. Her head was light, fuzzy with exhaustion. She had been awake for 36 hours, maybe more. The days had started to blur into one long, gray smear of survival. The front porch was a vast, covered space, shielded from the rain. A small upholstered bench sat against one wall. It looked impossibly soft. She pressed the doorbell, a gentle chime echoing from deep within the house. No answer. She waited. The wind sliced at her ankles. Her eyelids felt like they had tiny weights attached to them. Just for a second. She would just sit for a second. Her body sank onto the bench, the pizza box resting in her lap. The world tilted. The gentle sound of the rain became a lullaby. And everything went dark. Julian Vance hated storms. They reminded him of the night the silence had first fallen over his house. The night the laughter had stopped. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the rain lash against the glass, a tumbler of water untouched in his hand. The house was too big, too quiet. Every room was a ghost, filled with the memory of his wife, Sarah. He heard a soft noise from the hallway. His son, Leo, stood there, a small shadow in his superhero pajamas. "I can't sleep, Daddy." Julian's heart clenched. Leo was 8, but he carried the grief of an old man in his eyes. "I know, buddy. The thunder is loud tonight. Is Mommy scared of the thunder in heaven?" The question was a direct hit, stealing the air from Julian's lungs. He knelt, pulling his son into a hug that felt wholly inadequate. "No, Leo, there are no storms in heaven, only sunshine." He wasn't sure if he believed it, but his son needed to. The doorbell chimed. Julian frowned. The pizza. He had forgotten he'd ordered it. A weak attempt at normalcy for the kids, a Friday night tradition they hadn't kept in over a year. "Stay here, I'll be right back," he told Leo, his voice gentle. He walked to the massive front door and pulled it open, a practiced, tired smile ready for the delivery driver. The smile vanished. There, on his porch bench, was a young woman. She was slumped over, fast asleep, her face pale and etched with an exhaustion so profound it looked like pain. A pizza box was tilted precariously in her lap, Her clothes were thin, soaked at the cuffs and hem. She looked fragile, like a bird fallen from its nest. He felt a surge of something that wasn't pity. It was a sharp, aching recognition of brokenness. He had seen that same look in the mirror for months. He stepped out onto the porch, the cold air hitting his bare feet. He knelt beside her. "Miss," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Miss, are you all right?" Her eyes fluttered open. They were a startling shade of green, clouded with confusion, and then, instantly, with panic. She scrambled to sit up, clutching the pizza box like a shield. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to." Her voice was a hoarse whisper. She looked around, mortified, her cheeks flushing with color. "I just sat down for a second. I'm so sorry." "It's okay," Julian said, his voice calm and steady. "Don't worry about it." She fumbled with the box, trying to hand it to him. Her hands were trembling. From cold or fear or something else, he couldn't tell. He took the box and pulled out his wallet, handing her several large bills. Far more than the cost of the pizza. She stared at the money, her eyes wide. "Sir, this is too much." "It's for the weight," he said simply. She shook her head, trying to hand some of it back. "No, I can't. I fell asleep. That was my fault." And then the words tumbled out, a quiet, devastating confession. "I'm sorry, sir. I have 3 jobs." The sentence hung in the air between them. It wasn't an excuse. It was a fact, a crushing, unbearable fact. In that moment, he didn't see a pizza girl. He saw a human being at the very edge of her endurance. "Please," he said, gently pushing the money back toward her. "Take it." He looked at her thin jacket, the rain starting to whip onto the porch. He couldn't just let her walk back out into that storm. He couldn't. "Come inside," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a quiet command, devoid of threat, full of something she hadn't heard in a very long time. Care. She flinched, her eyes widening in alarm. "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly." "Just for a little while," he insisted gently. "Get warm. Have something to eat that isn't from a box, please." Elara stared at him, at his kind eyes, at the deep worry etched around them. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to take the money and disappear back into the anonymity of the night. Accepting kindness was a debt, a danger. But the thought of the cold, damp car was unbearable. The thought of another night shivering under a thin blanket made her want to weep. And his voice was so safe. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Following him inside was like stepping into another dimension. The air was warm and smelled faintly of lemon and wood smoke. The silence was vast, echoing in the cathedral-like space of the foyer. Everything was clean lines and muted colors, beautiful but sterile. It felt like a museum, not a home. A small boy with his father's serious eyes peeked out from behind a wide archway. Beside him, a little girl with big, curious brown eyes and a head of riotous curls clutched a worn-looking stuffed rabbit. They were his children. The realization hit Elara with the force of a physical blow. She didn't belong here. She was a stray, dirty, and broken, wandering into a palace. "This is Leo, and this is Mia," Julian said softly. "Kids, this is... I'm sorry, I didn't get your name." "Elara," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She felt their eyes on her, assessing, judging. Children were brutally honest. They would see right through her. They would see the failure, the fear. Julian led her toward a kitchen that was larger than her entire old apartment. He gestured to a stool at a gleaming marble island. "Please, sit." She sat gingerly on the edge of the stool, feeling utterly out of place. He moved around the kitchen with a quiet efficiency, pulling out a mug, filling a kettle. He wasn't looking at her, and she was grateful for it. It gave her a moment to breathe, a moment to stop the trembling in her hands. The little girl, Mia, padded into the kitchen, her bunny clutched tight. She stopped a few feet away from Ilara and just stared, her thumb in her mouth. Ilara offered a small, hesitant smile. Mia didn't smile back. She just watched. Julian placed a steaming mug of tea in front of Ilara. "There's soup," he offered. "It's nothing special, just tomato." "You don't have to do this," Ilara said, her voice thick with emotion. She felt like a charity case, a burden. "I want to," he replied, his back to her as he worked at the stove. "You look like you need it." He was right. She needed it more than he could ever know. She wrapped her cold hands around the warm mug, the heat a small miracle. She took a sip. The warmth spread through her chest, chasing away some of the deep, gnawing chill. A tear escaped and slid down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, hoping he hadn't seen. He had. He said nothing, simply placed a bowl of rich, red soup in front of her with a piece of crusty bread. She ate. She didn't realize how ravenous she was until the first spoonful hit her tongue. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. She ate slowly at first, then with a quiet urgency, her hunger overriding her shame. When she was done, she looked up to find both children still watching her. Leo, the boy, held a piece of paper and some crayons. He was studying her with an unnerving intensity. Mia had moved closer. She was now standing right beside Ilara's stool, her head tilted. Suddenly, she held up her stuffed rabbit. "His name is Barnaby," she announced in a small, clear voice. Ilara's heart stuttered. It was the first word anyone besides the man had spoken to her. "He's very handsome, Mia," Ilara said softly. Mia seemed to consider this. Then she placed Barnaby on the counter next to Ilara's empty bowl. A gift, an offering of trust. Ilara felt another wave of emotion, so strong this time she couldn't stop the tears from welling in her eyes. She looked over at Julian, who was leaning against the far counter, a look of quiet astonishment on his face. "She doesn't usually do that," he murmured, his voice laced with wonder. "Not with strangers." Ilara knew in that moment that she was not a stranger, not to this little girl. She reached out a hesitant hand and gently stroked the rabbit's worn ear. "Thank you for letting me meet him, Mia." Leo walked over then, holding out his drawing. It was a picture of a sun, a big, yellow, smiling sun. He pushed it into Ilara's hand and then quickly retreated back to his father's side, his duty done. Ilara looked at the drawing, at the wobbly smile and the bright yellow rays. It was a promise of warmth, of light, of a new day. She clutched the paper as if it were a holy relic. In this vast, silent house, these two small children had offered her the first real kindness she had known in years. And she didn't know what to do with it. Julian insisted she stay the night. The storm was getting worse, he argued, and it was too dangerous to drive. She knew he was just making an excuse. He had seen the truth in her exhaustion. He knew she had nowhere to go. The guest room he showed her to was larger than her last 3 apartments combined. A king-sized bed with a mountain of pillows sat in the center. The sheets were crisp and white. It looked like a bed from a dream. "The bathroom is through there," he said, pointing to a door. "There are fresh towels, and some of Sarah's things are still in the closet. A robe, some sweaters. Please, Use whatever you need." He said his wife's name with a quiet reverence that made Alara's chest ache for him. After he left, she stood in the middle of the room, feeling like an imposter. She took a shower, the hot water washing away the grime and the cold. She scrubbed her skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the memory of the past year. She found a soft cashmere robe in the closet. It smelled faintly of lavender and vanilla, of a life well lived, of love. She wrapped it around herself, the fabric a gentle caress. When she finally climbed into the bed, it was like sinking into a cloud. For the first time in so long, her muscles unclenched. Her body, which had been a tight knot of stress for months, finally began to release. But sleep did not come. Her mind was a racetrack of thoughts, the kindness of this man, the quiet sorrow in his eyes, the watchful faces of his children. She was safe. For tonight, she was safe. The thought was so foreign, so overwhelming, that it brought a fresh wave of tears. She cried silently into the pillow, mourning the person she used to be and terrified of the stranger she had become. Downstairs, Julian was also awake. He sat in his leather armchair in the dark, the sleeping house groaning around him. He kept seeing her face, the raw vulnerability in her eyes when she'd woken up on his porch, the way she'd cradled that cup of tea like it was a lifeline. "I'm sorry, sir. I have 3 jobs." The words echoed in his head. He ran a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He moved markets with a single phone call. But he lived in a world so insulated, so far removed from that kind of struggle, that her simple statement had shaken him to his core. He thought of Sarah. She would have done the same thing. She would have brought the girl in, fed her, given her a warm bed without a second thought. Sarah had been the heart of this house. Without her, it was just a beautiful, empty shell. But tonight, for a few moments in the kitchen, it hadn't felt so empty. Seeing Mia offer up Barnaby, seeing Leo give the woman his drawing, it was the most life he had seen in his children in months. She had a gentleness about her, a quiet stillness that seemed to calm the turbulent waters of his home. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know her story. But he knew he couldn't let her go back to a life that forced her to sleep on strangers' porches. He couldn't fix the world. He couldn't even fix the gaping hole in his own family. But maybe, just maybe, he could fix this one thing. Hours later, thirst drove Alara from the bed. She crept down the stairs, her bare feet silent on the cool wood. The house was bathed in moonlight, streaming through the massive windows. She found her way to the kitchen, her eyes adjusted to the dark. A figure was sitting in the living room, silhouetted against the glass. Julian. He turned his head as if he sensed her presence. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in the quiet. "No," she whispered, hovering in the doorway. "I was just getting some water." "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Join me." She hesitated, then walked slowly into the room and sat down. The space between them was filled with unspoken questions. "Thank you," she said finally, breaking the silence. "For everything. I don't know how to repay you." "There's nothing to repay," he said. "Anyone would have done the same." She knew that wasn't true. Most people would have closed the door. Most people would have looked right through her. "You have a beautiful home," she said, changing the subject. "And beautiful children." A sad smile touched his lips. "They're good kids. They miss their mother." The words hung in the air, an invitation. "I'm so sorry," Ilara said softly. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the rain that had softened to a drizzle. "It was a year ago," he began, his voice thick with unshed grief. "An aneurysm. One minute she was here, laughing about something Mia said, and the next, she was gone." He spoke of the silence, the emptiness, the crushing weight of being a single parent while trying to hold himself together. He talked about how the light seemed to have gone out of his children's eyes. "This house used to be filled with noise," he said, a hollow ache in his voice. "Music, laughter. Now, most days, all I hear is the echo." Ilara listened, her own pain a dull throb in her chest. She understood echoes. She understood silence. His vulnerability made her feel brave. "He told me I was nothing without him," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Julian turned to look at her, his full attention on her now. "His name was Marcus," she continued, her gaze fixed on her hands, which were twisting in her lap. "We were together for 5 years. I thought we were going to get married." She told him everything, the subtle manipulations that had isolated her from her friends and family, the way he had taken control of her finances, convincing her it was for their future, the constant, soul-crushing criticism that had chipped away at her confidence until there was nothing left. "When he left, he took everything," she whispered. "The money was gone. The apartment was in his name. He even took the car we bought together. I was left with a mountain of debt he'd racked up in my name, and this." She gestured vaguely, indicating her own brokenness. "He made me believe I deserved it." They sat in the shared darkness, two strangers bound by the common language of loss. His, a sudden, tragic theft. Hers, a slow, methodical poisoning. But the pain was the same. The hollowness was the same. "He was wrong," Julian said, his voice firm, cutting through her haze of self-blame. "What you are is a survivor." She looked up at him then, really looked at him. And for the first time, she saw past the wealth, past the beautiful house. She saw a man who was kind, a man who was decent, a man who was just as wounded as she was. In the quiet hours before dawn, a fragile bridge of trust was built between them. One day turned into 2. 2 days turned into a week. Ilara didn't leave. Julian didn't ask her to. An unspoken arrangement fell into place. She started to cook, filling the silent kitchen with the smells of baking bread and simmering stews. Simple, comforting food. She found she had a knack for it, a forgotten passion from a life before Marcus. The children began to orbit her. She would sit with Leo for hours, helping him build elaborate Lego castles. She discovered he was a gifted artist, but shy about his talent. She praised his drawings, framing the smiling sun and hanging it on the giant stainless steel refrigerator, a splash of color in the monochrome world. She taught Mia how to braid Barnaby's ears, singing soft lullabies that she remembered from her own childhood. Laughter started to return to the house. First, it was just a small giggle from Mia, then a full-bellied laugh from Leo. They were sounds Julian hadn't heard in a year. They were the sound of his world coming back to life. He would come home from work, the tension of his day melting away the moment he walked through the door. He would find them all in the living room, building a fort out of blankets, or in the backyard, Ilara pushing Mia on the swing. She wasn't trying to replace Sarah. She was simply filling a space that had been painfully empty. She was bringing warmth back into the cold corners of their lives. He started coming home earlier. He started leaving his work at the office. He found himself watching her, mesmerized by the gentle way she moved, the quiet strength in her eyes. She was healing, too. Color returned to her cheeks. The dark circles under her eyes began to fade. She still had nightmares sometimes, but they were becoming less frequent. The constant fear that had been her shadow was slowly receding. She felt safe. She felt worthy. One afternoon, she was helping Mia plant flowers in the garden. Her hands were covered in dirt, a smudge of it on her nose. She was laughing, a real, unburdened laugh, as Mia accidentally watered her foot. Julian stood on the patio, watching them. His heart felt full, so full it almost hurt. He was falling in love with her. The thought didn't scare him. It felt right. It felt like coming home. But the past is never truly gone. It waits in the shadows, patient. One Sunday, Julian took them all to a local park. It was a rare, spontaneous outing. He pushed Leo on the swings. Ilara had Mia on her shoulders, pretending to be a giant. For a few hours, they were just a normal family. A photographer, hidden in the bushes, snapped a picture of a grieving billionaire CEO, seemingly moved on with a mysterious new woman. The picture ended up on the front page of a gossip blog, and Marcus saw it. He didn't see Ilara's happiness. He saw an opportunity. He saw a lottery ticket. The first call came from a sleazy tabloid journalist. "We have a source," the man said, his voice dripping with insinuation, "who claims the woman you're seeing, Ilara, is a manipulative gold digger who left him in financial ruin." The story broke the next day. It was a twisted, venomous version of their history, painting Marcus as the victim and Ilara as a predator. Her name was everywhere. Her face was plastered next to headlines that screamed, "Lies." Ilara saw it on a news alert on Julian's tablet. The world stopped. The air rushed from her lungs. The carefully constructed safety of her new life shattered into a million pieces. He had found her. Even here, in this fortress of wealth and security, he had found a way to hurt her, to ruin her. She felt the old, familiar panic clawing at her throat. The shame was a physical weight, crushing her. She wasn't just bringing her brokenness into this house anymore. She was bringing her poison. She was tainting them. Julian, the children. She had to go. It was the only way to protect them. Julian found her in the guest room, frantically stuffing her few belongings into the bag she'd arrived with. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely zip it. "Ilara, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight with alarm. "I have to leave," she choked out, not looking at him. I can't let him do this to you, to your family." "Do what? Let a pathetic liar print garbage in some rag?" He stepped in front of her, blocking her path to the door. He gently took her shaking hands in his. "Look at me." She lifted her tear-filled eyes to his. "I don't care what he says," Julian said, his voice a low, fierce promise. "I know you. I know your heart, and none of what he says matters. But your reputation," she whispered, "your company, the children." "My reputation will survive," he said firmly. "My company will be fine, and my children. My children are happier than they have been in a very long time. Because of you." He cupped her face, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You are not leaving," he stated, his voice softening. "This is your home now. We face this together." The word home broke her. She collapsed against him, sobbing, the terror and the shame finally pouring out of her. He held her, stroking her hair, murmuring words of comfort until the storm inside her passed. He was not going to let her run. He was not going to let Marcus win. The next morning, Julian Vance called a press conference. He didn't hide. He didn't issue a sterile statement through a publicist. He stood before a sea of cameras, a titan of industry, looking calm and resolute. Ilara watched on a television in the study, her heart pounding in her chest. "Good morning," Julian began, his voice steady and clear. "I have called you here today to address the recent, baseless attacks on a private citizen, a woman I care for deeply." He didn't deny knowing Ilara. He didn't diminish her importance. "The claims being made are not only false, they are the desperate actions of a cruel and manipulative man. A man whose history of deceit my legal team is currently compiling." He looked directly into the camera, as if he were speaking to Marcus himself. "But I am not here to talk about him. I am here to talk about Ilara." He spoke of her kindness, her resilience, her quiet strength. He didn't share the details of her past trauma. That was her story to tell. But he painted a picture of a woman of immense character and integrity. "She came into my family's life at a time of great darkness," he said, his voice catching slightly. "And she brought back the light. She has shown my children, and me, what it means to hope again." He paused, letting the words sink in. "If you want to attack me, fine. I can take it, but I will not stand by and allow you to slander this woman. She is part of my family. An attack on her is an attack on me, and I will protect my family at all costs." He didn't take any questions. He simply turned and walked away from the podium, leaving behind a room of stunned reporters. In the study, Ilara was weeping again, but these were not tears of fear or shame. They were tears of overwhelming, breathtaking gratitude. He had stood in front of the entire world and fought for her. He had called her family. The public narrative shifted almost immediately. Julian's powerful, sincere defense of Ilara, coupled with the evidence his lawyers began to leak about Marcus's fraudulent past, turned the tide. Marcus was exposed as a predator and a liar. Ilara was recast as a survivor. The threat was neutralized. The storm had passed. In the quiet aftermath, something had changed. The unspoken thing between them was now spoken. The fragile bridge had become a foundation. One evening, a few weeks later, they were all in the living room. A fire crackled in the hearth. Julian was reading a story to Mia, who was curled in his lap. Ilara was on the floor with Leo, looking over a new drawing he had made. It was a picture of the four of them, a stick-figure family, holding hands under a smiling sun. "Are you going to be our new mommy?" Leo asked, his voice small and serious. The question was so direct, so innocent, it hung in the air like a held breath. Ilara's heart stopped. She looked from Leo's hopeful face to Julian's, whose eyes were shining with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Mia sat up in her father's lap. "I want Ilara to be our mommy," she declared. She scrambled down and climbed into Ilara's lap, wrapping her small arms around her neck. "Please, stay forever," she whispered into Ilara's ear. Ilara hugged the little girl tight, her eyes filling with tears. She looked at Julian over Mia's curly head. He was watching them, a look of profound love on his face. He gently set his book aside and knelt on the floor in front of them. He took her free hand. "The kids seem to have made a decision," he said, his voice soft and a little shaky. He didn't have a ring. He hadn't planned a speech. It was messy and spontaneous and absolutely perfect. "Ilara," he began, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. You walked onto my porch and woke up my whole world. You healed my children. You healed me. I cannot imagine this house or my life without you in it." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me, Ilara? Will you let us be your family, officially?" Her answer was lost in a choked sob, but she nodded. She nodded again and again. "Yes," she finally managed to whisper. "Yes." Leo whooped with joy, and Mia squeezed her tighter. Julian leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, promising kiss that tasted of salt and home. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the love of this makeshift family, all the broken pieces of her life finally clicked into place. She was no longer the pizza girl who fell asleep on a porch. She was home. Their wedding was not a grand affair. There were no headlines, no reporters. It took place in the backyard, under the shade of a giant oak tree, where Julian and Sarah had carved their initials years ago. The guests were few. Julian's closest friend and business partner, Ilara's one remaining aunt, flown in from out of state, and the children. Leo was the ring-bearer, handsome and serious in a tiny tuxedo. He carried the pillow with a solemnity befitting the most important job in the world. Mia was the flower girl, a vision in a white dress, scattering rose petals with joyful abandon. Ilara wore a simple, elegant ivory dress. She wasn't wearing diamonds or pearls. Around her wrist was a simple, handmade bracelet of colorful beads that Mia had made for her. As she walked down the grassy aisle toward Julian, she wasn't thinking of her past. She wasn't thinking of the cold, or the hunger, or the fear. She was only thinking of the man waiting for her, his eyes full of a love so deep it was a physical presence. She was thinking of the two children who stood beside him, their faces beaming. Her family. When they exchanged vows, they weren't flowery or poetic. They were simple promises to protect, to cherish, to heal, to always bring light into the darkness. After the ceremony, they didn't have a lavish reception. They had a picnic on the lawn. They ate pizza, delivered from the same place Ilara used to work for. And as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Julian put his arm around her. "Happy," he whispered. She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching Leo chase Mia across the lawn, their laughter echoing in the evening air. "More than I ever thought was possible," she said. The house was no longer a silent monument to grief. It was a home, filled with the beautiful, chaotic noise of a family, filled with light. Later that night, Ilara went to tuck Mia into bed. The little girl was already half asleep, her bunny Barnaby clutched under her chin. "Good night, my sweet girl," Ilara whispered, kissing her forehead. Mia's eyes fluttered open. She reached over to her nightstand and picked up a familiar, slightly crumpled piece of paper. It was the drawing Leo had given Ilara on her first night, the smiling sun. Mia pushed it into her hand. "This is for you, Mommy," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. The word, spoken so easily, so naturally, was the most beautiful sound Ilara had ever heard. Her heart felt like it might burst with love. She held the drawing to her chest, the paper a fragile, precious thing. She looked out the window. In the yard below, illuminated by the soft glow of the patio lights, Julian was teaching Leo how to find constellations in the night sky. She saw him look up at her window, and even from this distance, she could feel his smile. Her life had started over on a cold, rainy night, on the porch of a stranger. She had been empty, broken, lost. But sometimes the lowest point is not an ending. Sometimes it is the beginning of everything. Sometimes your broken pieces are just waiting for the right hands to help you put them back together, creating something stronger and more beautiful than what was there before.